Today is 28th, 2008, at Springdale Village Retirement Center in East Mesa, Arizona.
Okay, this is David Blackwell, Bakewell? Bakewell, we're way off there.
It's an old English name.
Is it David or Dave?
Dave, well, I'm more commonly known as Dave.
Okay, so Dave Bakewell. And when was your birthday?
The 14th of August, 1931.
Okay.
Long time ago.
Great. And here in the interview you have Kelly and Joshua Houghton, and we're working with an Eagle project. Okay. The first questions they want to know is what war you served in and what branch of service.
Well, I didn't serve during any battle.
Okay.
But I served for 22 years
Wow.
in the Air Force.
Okay, in the Air Force. And what was your rank?
The rank I had when I retired was Senior Master Sergeant.
Okay. And
which is the second highest of the non-commissioned officers.
Great.
The highest is Chief Master Sergeant.
And what areas did you serve in?
You mean overseas?
Just, yeah, different places you were stationed.
Well, I tell you what. I enlisted in April of 1953 at La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I raised my hand. I was inducted into the Air Force on April 23rd, 1953 at Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was sent by train to San Antonio, Texas for basic training at Lackland Air Force Base. And after I finished that, I went to Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi, for aircraft control and warning operator school. And sometimes that's aircraft control and warning operators are known as scope dopes because they look at radar screens, and it's air defense radar. And after I finished that school, I went by troop ship to Okinawa, and I served at Naha Air Base, the capital city of Okinawa, Naha, for 19 months, and worked in the Air Defense Control Center there. Then I came back. I was assigned to Robins Air Force Base at Warner Robins, Georgia, and I was in an aircraft control and warning squadron there. And then some of my friends took tests for officer candidate school or aviation cadets, which was a forerunner of later the Air Force Academy was started, and there was no more aviation cadets. And anyway, I ended up back at Lackland Air Force Base as an aviation cadet and graduated from pre-flight school. And because of my peripheral vision, wasn't good enough to be a pilot, so they sent me to navigator school at Harlingen Air Force Base in Brownsville, Texas. And I really didn't want to be a navigator, and I think I wanted more to be just a spectator. But I wanted to go back to my old job in the radar field. And I was lucky I was able to go back to Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, and I became an enlisted weapons controller. And I'd sit at a radar scope and direct aircraft that were going cross country or that were involved in intercepts, training for intercepts like fighter jets. And then I received an assignment for Japan. So I went to Japan, and I was stationed on a mountaintop called Junijinyama, Mountain of the 12 Gods, up on the eastern coast of the island of Honshu. And we finally turned that radar site over to the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force. And in fact, the people I worked with all the time were young Japanese airmen. And then I was sent to Wakanai, Hokkaido. And Hokkaido is the northernmost island, and Wakanai is the northernmost city on Hokkaido. And it's just across the Soya Strait from the island of Sakhalin, which the Russians had. So you could look through high-powered telescopes and see Russian troops and their army vehicles going up the hillsides and on roads over there. And I got back, I was assigned to headquarters of the Portland Air Defense Sector in Oregon. And it was at Corvallis, Oregon. And I worked in a big building that had walls so thick that we said it was safe from nuclear attacks. And worked with IBM computers that would take up entire rooms at that time. Now they have laptops that do the same thing. And,
so did you live down there, or you just reported there?
I lived at just north of Corvallis, Oregon.
Okay.
And I was there for 6.5 years. And then I received an assignment for Germany, and it was at Neu-Ulm, Bavaria, and right next to the Danube River. It was across the river from the city of Ulm, where Albert Einstein was born, and a very historic area when Napoleon's army battled. You know, it's during his wartime. And after 4 years there, I was the first sergeant of an Air Force unit, and I lived on an Army base. I was the only Air Force NCO or sergeant living with 2,000 Army, U.S. Army, on an Army base. And then I worked at another base. And at first I was for 2 years I was in charge of radar operations, and then became the first sergeant for 2 years. And I was responsible for the welfare of the troops and discipline and all of that. And then I came back to the States, and I was assigned to Havre Air Force Station, Montana, up near the Canadian border at a radar site. And it was 35 miles north of the town of Havre, and you could see forever from a small hilltop up there where we had our radar set up, and looking into Canada, and you would see smoke coming up from the chimneys of ranch houses 20 miles over there or 30 miles over here. And then I received an assignment to Luke Air Force Base here at Glendale. And I worked in the big, what they call the Sage Blockhouse. It's just off the base, off of Litchfield Road. And this is like I worked in Oregon, with the big, thick walls that withstand nuclear attacks. At least that's what they hoped it would happen. And I was a senior director technician. I had a crew of 54 airmen and WAFs and men and women working for me. And then I received in 1972 an assignment to remote Alaska. So I went to Alaska, and it was 80 degrees here at Phoenix on the day that I left, and when I arrived at Anchorage it was 35 below, and I didn't have any long johns, and at Elmendorf Air Force Base they gave me a parka. And then I flew out to McGrath in a Wien Airlines plane, I think Boeing 737, and it was hauling food for the people out there, and I was hauling a Volkswagen Beetle, and I think there was a cow in the plane. And we arrived at night out at the airport there, and the terminal was a log house. And it had big pictures of bathing beauties on the beaches in Tahiti and everything up on the walls. And outside it was 35 below. And I was in charge, I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the radar operations there for a year. And that was a required time to be in remote Alaska, the radar stations, 1 year. And then I returned to the lower 48 states, and I was assigned to Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina. And my job there, I became the non-commissioned officer in charge of an Air Force inspection team. And we traveled 11 eastern states in Puerto Rico, inspecting Air Force, Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve radar stations. And then in 1975, on the 1st of May, I retired and returned to Phoenix.
Now, during your experience, what was Do you remember a time that was kind of an adventurous time or an experience?
It was always an adventure, always.
During your experience, did you ever have a time that was kind of scary, like that you thought you were in a tense situation, or?
Well, not really. I traveled an awful lot.
Right.
I was in the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg and France and Austria, of course, all over southern Germany. And it was just, I always loved to travel. I was in Hong Kong one time.
Oh, did you?
And, but
what was your favorite place?
I would say Germany.
Was it?
Yeah. I'd love to go back to Japan and see the people. I taught spoken English classes in Japan.
Okay.
Every week I would get on a train. I was located near an old fishing village. And I get on a train and go to a larger city about 30 miles away. And on Wednesday nights I would teach young business people. And they had a group called the Paris Circle. In other words, everything that was spoken, you'd keep repeating it. So they would record everything that I would say. Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. And how's your mother? Oh, she's fine, thank you. And how's your grandfather? Oh, he's fine, thank you. And it goes on and on. And years later, they were still playing those tapes for other people.
Kidding.
And then on Saturdays, I would go and teach middle school students. And I'd sit at the end of a long table, and they'd be seated on the floor, all the way down and around the table. And this was in the city hall. They had the meeting in the city hall because at the school, the principal didn't like Americans. So I couldn't go there. So they arranged for me to teach these classes in the city hall. And some of those students, the middle school students, their children have contacted me. Some of them have been going to UCLA or some college in Washington State.
That's great.
So,
well, that makes it worth it, huh?
I really enjoyed the 22 years.
That you were in, it's a long time. Now, what did you decide to join the Air Force?
I don't know.
Do you remember?
There's just something about the Air Force that seemed better than, it seemed more up with technology, modern technology, you know, computers and all of that. Of course, back in 1953, there wasn't too much in the way of computers.
Right.
And of course, there was no internet. But I just felt that the Air Force was a better service than being in the Marines or the Army or the Navy. Not to disparage them, but
right. It just was.
And I had a lot of friends in college that were being drafted. It was the Korean War, time of the Korean War, and I had a deferment for farm work. And in 1952, I left college and went home to my parents' farm and helped my dad. And then finally, I kept thinking, you know, I should be in there in the military. And all my friends were, and so that's why I went to the nearest big town, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and enlisted.
Now, when you enlisted, did you plan on making it a career?
No.
Okay.
No. I remember the recruiter telling me that within a matter of weeks I'd be an officer, quote unquote, which never happened. I mean, it was back in those days. A lot of promises were made to fulfill the quotas that the recruiters had, and I probably shouldn't say that, but
no. But you kept just extending your service.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you enjoyed it.
Yes.
Do you remember the first? Did you go to training camp when you first went in?
The basic training. I remember traveling by train from Milwaukee to Chicago, and there were a lot of us going from Milwaukee on the train to basic training. And then to Des Moines and Kansas City, and in Kansas City we got on a train that only had I believe a locomotive and one passenger car. and it was the MKT, the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad. And it would stop in town so that we could get off to eat. If the engineer was hungry and we'd come to a town, we'd all get off and walk to the nearest restaurant. And yes, I remember basic training, and I was rather fortunate because I had a first cousin who was a Red Cross girl at Lockman Air Force Base. And during the first week I was there, we were told to go outside our barracks and police the area. And that means pick up cigarette butts and candy wrappers and all. That's called policing the area. So we're out there picking up all of this stuff, and a car pulled up, and these two ladies jumped out of the car and came running, and one of them hugged me. And my friends, the other basic trainees, looked and they said, well, Dave's only been here for a week, and already there are two women coming to see her. And what they didn't know was that this lady was my first cousin from Iowa.
Oh.
And later on, one day she asked my squadron, I don't know, first sergeant or whatever, that they needed to see me at the Red Cross office. And they sent over a Red Cross station wagon to pick me up. And I spent the entire afternoon eating cookies, homemade cookies, and Kool-Aid, drinking Kool-Aid. And meanwhile, the troops back at my barracks are all policing the area, picking them.
That's great.
So I was fortunate that she was there.
So you owed her big time. That's great. Okay, let's see. So when you talk about your job experience, you worked with radars?
Yes. Yeah.
And
I started out as a simple radar operator, and later on, as I got more rank, promotions, get more into the administrative
paperwork.
field. Yes, paperwork.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'd be working in offices, and then in Germany, I became the first sergeant and had all these troops to take care of and look after.
So with the radar, it's not like a control tower, right? It's more it's more like looking for enemies or things that are.
Yes. And if an aircraft needs to go from point A to point B, you help them, giving them directions, and if you see them going off, instead of being on the route that they should be on. I remember working one time with an aircraft I was in Georgia, and I saw this aircraft going out over the Gulf of Mexico. And it turned out that the pilot was lost. It was a small aircraft, I don't know, maybe a Cessna or a Piper Cub or something, and it should have been going north. It should have been up in Tennessee, and here it's going south out over the Gulf of Mexico. And I got contact with them and helped them back. And then there was in Japan, there was a jet aircraft that went down in the ocean, and I would report it to higher headquarters, and it's immediately start sending out the Coast Guard and aircraft to look for the downed pilot, and I was involved in a lot of that rescue.
That's what I was going to ask is, if there were flights that went down when you were watching. So.
I also was on duty at Luke Air Force Base when this D.B. Cooper up in, the man who bailed out of an aircraft just recently. They found a parachute. They're not sure if it belonged to him, but I was on duty at the time that the D.B. Cooper incident happened, where he got, I don't know, millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then bailed out of the aircraft somewhere around the Columbia River. And and the information I would get, I'd pass on. It was to the FBI and sometimes UFOs.
Really?
There'd be people in California that would see some light move across the sky, and it would turn out it would be a searchlight or something from the nearest airport. And it would happen to hit some fog.
The right area. Yeah.
And we always had to send that information on, whether it was no matter what we thought of it.
Did you ever see anything suspicious?
No.
Right. So what were your most memorable experiences?
In the military.
Yeah.
I guess I would have to say that while I was in Germany and my travels, I mean, there was nothing, you know, nothing newsworthy, really newsworthy at all.
So you said you weren't in a war, but did you serve during a war
I
time?
enlisted before the end of the Korean War. And the Korean War, they still had to exchange prisoners. And that didn't happen until after I was in Okinawa.
And you retired from the military what day was it again?
1st of May 1975.
Okay. So the Vietnam War was going on.
I was in
During
Germany
that
during
time?
that time. And you go where the military sends you.
Right.
I could just as well have gone to Vietnam. And I had
Right.
friends, Army friends in Germany that would be sent to Vietnam.
That's what I was going to ask, because you must have had comrades.
Yes,
Who went?
and especially Army personnel would be sent, and maybe a week or 2 weeks later we'd find out that they were killed.
Really? That must have been a high tense time.
Yes,
So.
and for the Army troops, their reassignment to Vietnam would happen so fast that they'd have to leave their cars, and no way of getting them back to the States, so the cars would sit in the parking lot, or their family would be left behind, you know, family and the wives and children.
That was a stressful time, probably for everyone in the military at that time, huh?
And I know Air Force personnel that were killed in Vietnam. So.
Yeah, I was saying that just seems like a pretty tense time. You never know if a phone call was coming. Huh,
That's true. Very true.
To get. Let's see. How did your family feel about you being in the Air Force?
They worried. I mean, they really worried about me. But my oldest brother, who lived in Scottsdale for 30 years, he was a nose gunner on B-24 bombers in World War II in Italy. And of course we just worried ourselves sick over him. And then my second oldest brother of Tulsa, Oklahoma, he served in the Army during the Korean War, but in Augsburg, Germany, where he worked with the Army Finance Department. And then after he got out, then I enlisted. So it was 3 of us, 3 siblings in the family that my parents had to worry about.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And it was
They made it through,
one
huh?
after the other.
They made it through though, huh?
Yeah.
Were you sad when you retired, or were you ready to retire?
I kept worrying about what was happening back at the office.
Were you?
I thought maybe they're not doing things right. And some of them even would call me to find out about where a certain piece of paper was at, or a certain file, but I worried, and I felt I should be putting on my uniform and going to work. All of a sudden I wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
And I was here in Phoenix in an apartment, and I wasn't getting up in the morning and putting on my uniform, and I really missed that.
It was a part of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And but I've had a lot of
Good friendships.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, let's see. Do you belong to a veterans organization?
Yes, I do. I belong to the American Legion.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to the Retired Enlisted Association. I belong to the Air Force Sergeants Association. I belong to the Air Force Association.
So quite a few of them.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
So you keep at them? Veterans?
Not really.
Not as much anymore.
I get their publications and everything, like the American Legion
right.
magazine and
Right.
Air Force Times. This is a weekly newspaper. There's also the Army Times and the Navy Times and the Marine Times, and all published by the same company.
So with your experience in the Air Force, do you pay particular attention to, like, when they talk about military things on the news or wars or?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I have access to the internet. I have web TV system.
Okay.
And I'm always checking the news every day, and I look at the International Herald Tribune, published in Paris, and I go to the BBC, and I go to all the Air Force news sites, websites, and
just keeping tabs on what's going
yes,
on.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I always hope that others are doing the same thing.
Yeah. I was just thinking, from your career, though, you're probably more in tune to listening to particular things, or you know a little bit more about the workings of the military than.
Well,
Yeah. So.
I've had some experience.
Yes. So you probably are checking in quite a bit. Do you ever have any reunions?
Yes. I belong to 4 reunion associations. One is for radar sites, people who were at radar sites on Okinawa or on islands off of Okinawa. And another one is for all the radar sites in northern Japan, on Honshu and Hokkaido. And another one is for the aviation cadets that I was in for a while. And then there is the 601st Tactical Control Wing, which had all the radar sites in West Germany. And I was the first vice president of the Reunion Association. I was elected in Nashville in 1998. And then I helped plan the reunion at Tucson for 1999. And I've attended reunions at Charleston, South Carolina, and Bloomington, Minnesota, and Dayton, Ohio, and Colorado Springs, and Omaha.
Wow.
And last September I went to Alamogordo, New Mexico, where a reunion was held, and the German Air Force, which trains there with their jet fighters, they invited us to be their guests for their annual Oktoberfest.
Oh, good.
And that was just 6,000 people showed up for that one-day event.
So I was going to say, do you miss traveling? Because you used to travel quite a bit.
Very much, yeah, and I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Unless somebody's with me.
How did your service and experience affect your life?
The discipline was one of the main things that kept me from
Going off.
going wild. Yeah, going off. Yeah. Discipline helped a lot.
Because it's pretty structured, huh?
And I really don't know how to answer that. It's
give you world experiences, huh?
a world of experience. Just incredible.
These are all the awards you
The
received,
ribbons,
right?
yeah. Now this is the Air Force Commendation Medal,
Let me make sure it's on.
and there is an oak leaf cluster on it right here, which indicates that I received it a second time. Well, on the day that I retired, I was awarded the Air Force Commendation Medal for a third time. So there should be another
And the
cluster,
third one.
metal cluster on it. And this was a Korean medal here, showing that I had been not in the war zone,
But you were
I was
in during that
during
time.
the time of the, and I was in the Far East during that time. Now the rank, when I retired, this was Senior Master Sergeant rank. Since then, they changed the ranks, and they've added one more stripe for Senior Master Sergeant. So this is the old
Right.
rank. And this here, back when I retired, all of these stripes from there on down would be Master Sergeant. Then this would be Senior Master Sergeant, and then one more stripe
More is
up
on.
would be Chief Master Sergeant, the highest rank.
That's a beautiful uniform. So since you have one that's Korean, is there one that's you were in during the Vietnam?
No.
No?
I would have had to be over there.
Oh,
in
I
the Far
see.
East or in the war zone.
Right. Okay.
To get it. So I don't have no medals concerning Vietnam. This one here, I believe, is Outstanding Unit Citation, which was given to a unit I was in twice. There's another thing right on there,
Oh, right.
which would indicate that the second time it was awarded. to a unit I was in.
It looks like a pineapple. Is that what is that?
They call them oak leaf.
Oh, oak
leaf
leaves.
clusters.
Okay, I see. Yeah, it does look like a leaf.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I've forgotten what some of the others are. There's a National Defense Service Medal, and always the Good Conduct Medal.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody it's almost automatic to get Good Conduct Medal.
Well, this one looks different.
I think that's the Good Conduct Medal.
Oh, okay.
And the clusters are for every 4 years. So it's awarded every 4 years. If you can keep your nose clean for 4 years, then you get the Good Conduct Medal. And
Good for you.
So
that's beautiful uniform. It's good that you still have it.
So I've thought about giving this to a museum.
Yeah.
You know, there are military museums that would like to have
right.
military uniforms to put on
right.
mannequins or dummies. And
Chief Master
Sergeant.
Sounds so impressive.
And my rank was Senior Master Sergeant. Well, basic training 1953 at Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, and then I went to AC, but now we're replaced by little laptop
right.
things. And then I attended the Air Defense Command Senior NCO Academy, Hamilton Air Force Base, California. That's in San Rafael, California. I forget what year that was, but it was while I was stationed in Oregon. And then in Germany, I attended the Air Ground Operations School at Sembach Air Force Base. And I forget what year because I was there for 4 years, right. So I was in one of those. Then I returned, I went to Havre, Montana, and they sent me back to Biloxi, Mississippi to attend another school at Keesler Air Force Base. It was called the Buick School, and it was backup intersect control.
Wow.
Buick. And then when I was traveling with an Air Force inspection team in 1974 and 75, it was decided that I should go back to Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi, and attend a school called 407L, which is a type of radar.
Wow.
School.
Yes, you got plenty of schooling there.
So,
and you said the date you enlisted was what day?
The date that I raised my hand
yes.
and said I do, it was the 23rd of April, 1953, and I was at Milwaukee.
And you retired May of 75?
The 1st of May, 75.
Okay. And then when we were going over your medals, you said one of them was for the Korean, one you said was Korean, one you said was...
Yeah, one is Korean now. And one is Air Force Commendation,
Air Force.
which I was awarded 3 times.
Commendation. Okay.
That's the one I'm most proud of.
And you got it 3 times, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, 3 times.
And do you remember any of the other ones?
Well, there's the National Defense, well, there's, I don't know how many medals
yeah,
are on
I
that
know.
thing.
Just if you remembered any of the names.
Presidential Unit Citations, which wasn't given directly to me, but
right.
it would be to a unit that I served in for being an outstanding unit.
Okay. And then wasn't one a conduct? Was one of the words for conduct or something?
Oh, good conduct.
Good conduct. Okay.
Yeah, well, the good conduct, that's probably the most minor medal
right.
of all. As long as you, you know, behave yourself. Behave yourself.
You don't end up in jail. You're okay.
Every 4 years, just automatic.
Alrighty, I think we have. What would you call your special duties? Were
one call that when I was in northern Japan, I received word that we should be on the lookout for radio calls from U-2 pilots. Well, we didn't know what a U-2 was. We had never been told. It was highly, highly secret. Until a model airplane company came out with a picture of a U-2. The U.S. government had never issued any picture. And so I would sit up at night and I had this Japanese crew. And they're sitting at all the radar scopes, and they're drawing on a plotting board. It's a plexiglass board. The movement of aircraft. They're using what they call grease pencils to plot the movement of aircraft. And I never did receive a call from a U-2 pilot. And we were told that if a U-2 should land in the local area and we had no airfield or anything, that we should get a child's wagon and put under one of the wings, the end of the wings, because there's no tires out at the end of the wings. So after that, Francis Gary Powers was shot down in Russia, and he was the famous U-2 pilot, and he was put in prison in Russia.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. It's been really interesting talking to you.
It's difficult to cover 22 years.
You know what? I'm sure it is.
And lots of travel and experiences.
Oh my goodness. You gave a great overview though, and I think it'll be important for them to keep that. So we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for serving our country.
Is this going to be in an IMAX theater?
Yeah, you never know.